Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we're going to discuss the production from our top garden here in 2022. Let's get going. Well, a lot like the old garden, the top garden wasn't actually completed until right around February-ish or whatever. So we didn't plant a spring garden in there. In fact, minus the cabbages, we didn't put anything in there until the end of April. We also had a fall garden that was in there as well. So like we did last week, what I would like to do is we're going to go ahead and start this video off. We'll talk about all the mistakes that we made here in the first year of the top garden in relation to our homestead and how it affects our food security. And then once we get through all of that, then we'll talk about all the stuff that we did successfully, and we'll finish off with a few notes. The first mistake that we made in the top garden, and I alluded to it earlier, was we didn't get it finished and filled until February. And that simply just doesn't allow enough time for a nice rich compost to do what they call cool off before you had to plant it. So the main things that it had an adverse effect on were our pole beans, and the pole beans looked great. We got a lot of growth out of them, but that's all we got. We got a lot of leaves, a lot of vines, very few flowers or beans to them. So, and I definitely attribute that to the status of the compost. The second thing it had an adverse effect on was the squash. So we'll talk about the squash a little bit more later, but I do believe that the compost being so hot, it had an adverse effect on our early yellow squash. The second mistake was also similar to what we did in the old garden. Was I did not loosen the soil enough last year. I didn't do it in any of the gardens, so you'll probably see this in all the videos. It was a little disappointing, especially at the end of the year when I went through to take the vegetables out. I realized if I would have just taken, half hour, 45 minutes in each garden to go through and just sort of loosen the soil, let it absorb more water, I would have had a lot more production from our gardens. So what I've done is, starting at the first of the year, every 2 weeks, I'm going to take the pitchfork out and I'm going to go through and loosen all the compost. Make sure I don't hit any of the plant roots, anything like that. But I do want to just make sure that I do it every 2 weeks. And so even though there's nothing in the ground, I'm just getting myself in the habit of doing that right now. In 2022, we planted potatoes on the bottom side of the old garden. And the potatoes came up and the plants looked really good right up until, I don't know, the end of May or so. What I'm getting at is I failed miserably when it comes to the potatoes. And a lot of that comes from the lack of watering and inexperience on my part. I've done a lot of research to find out what happened and how to avoid it going forward. So going into this next year, we're going to plant the potatoes in a different area. There'll be a video coming out on that about our plan for 2023 in our gardens. But having said that, the potato was an absolute disaster. I failed miserably. So, like my wife, you can all point and laugh at me. I'm going to add on to the end of this as far as another failure. I'm going to say the pole beans. And even though I mentioned them earlier, with the compost, I just want to bring them up again because the trellis system and everything, it looked so good. And when they were growing, they looked very, very promising. All summer long, we were waiting to have a whole bunch of pole beans to eat, and it just never came up. We would get, a few of them that we could throw in stir fries and that sort of thing, but we just never were able to pick enough of the pole beans to go inside and have pole beans by themselves as a side dish with any meal throughout the course of the summer. So anyway, the pole beans, I failed on that one as well. Well, now that I've got all the embarrassing stuff out of the way, let's move on to the things that we did well in the top garden in 2022. I want to start that with tomatoes. Now, earlier this week, we did publish our plan for tomatoes for 2023. I'll stick that right up here. So let's talk about our tomatoes from the top garden. The tomatoes, as you can see, these plants did really well. We started them all from seed here on the homestead. I was really proud of the way they came off. Our Roma tomatoes especially, it was a difficult year last year to grow tomatoes, but we were highly successful in filling our freezer up. So just to kind of give you an idea of how many Roma tomatoes that we pulled out of the garden over last year, we were able to fill up an entire freezer. We've been eating on those tomatoes since probably the end of September, and we eat Roma tomatoes at least once a week in either pasta or rice or some way. And we will have enough to make it all the way through winter and still have some whenever the early June rolls around next year and we start getting new fresh tomatoes. So of course the Romas won't come off until, I don't know, probably into July or so. But just to kind of give you an idea of how many Roma tomatoes, we have enough to last us probably in the area of around 6 to 7 months. The Beefmaster tomatoes, I think last year we grew Beefmasters. We're going to grow beefsteak, I think, this year and just see what the difference is. But the Beefmaster tomatoes, they also did well. We got several rounds of just really nice, good size slicing tomatoes. And again, I'll just mention the weather one more time, but it was a challenge for a lot of people to get tomatoes last year, and we were really pleased with the fact that we were able to get some. I just can't help but think if we have a temperate summer in 2023 that perhaps we'll do even better on them. But the first thing I want to consider as a win are tomatoes, because number one, they're my favorite, and number two, we had enough to where I could eat them most of the year. The next major win from the top garden were ground cherries. Well, Leslie and I first tried ground cherries in 2021 at our local farmer's market. We fell in love with them. The taste is amazing. They're really good for you. So in 2022, we grew them for the first time. We had a lot of success. We had ground cherries coming off from probably mid-June all the way through the end of August. So from now on, we will absolutely have ground cherries in our gardens. So just a couple things I wanted to mention here at the end of it. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned our cabbages. I'm gonna call them kind of a draw. We grew 6 of them. They started off, they looked absolutely fantastic. Towards the end of their growing cycle though, when it was getting right around time to start planting the summer garden, they got this weird, I believe they call it cabbage rust, but all the outside leaves started like just turning black, and we cut the heads off before we could get there. The cabbages were really sweet. They were really good, but they weren't quite as big as what we wanted. So they tasted good. We grew cabbage, but I still can't consider it an absolute like success, if that makes sense. I also wanted to throw in the fall garden. We were able to eat salads every day from this garden from the end of August or maybe beginning of September, all the way through the hard freeze that we had at the end of 2022. And we were able to grow beets, we grew radishes, and we grew lettuce and carrots. Now, again, that's what we kind of call our salad garden or whatever. And it did really well. I mean, we had enough to eat, one meal a day out of it. But I can't help but feel like I left a lot on the table from a room perspective. So I guess going into 2023, I've already kind of got my plan made out. 2022 in the top garden was really clunky for me, from an operational standpoint. I could have done a lot more going from our summer gardens into our fall garden. So that's just something that I gotta, just take note of and make sure that I'm better at it going forward. But with all of that out of the way, I just wanted to thank everyone for making it out here until the end. Until next time, I hope that all you folks take care of yourselves. Peace.